And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. Finally, whether you are citizens of America or citizens of the world, ask of us here the same high standard of strength and sacrifice which we ask of you. With a good conscience, our only sure reward, with history the final judge of our deeds, let us go forth to lead the land we love, asking his blessing and his help, but knowing that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own.
President John F. Kennedy's inaugural address, in which he asked Americans and citizens of the world to work together, quote, with a good conscience, our only sure reward. Joining us now, President of the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haass. His new book out today is entitled The Bill of Obligations, The 10 Habits of Good Citizens. Also with us for this discussion is author and NBC News presidential historian Michael Beschloss. And Richard,
hold on a second. Richard, before we start, anything you want to say about the Giants today?
No.
Joe.
Anything?
This is not part of his civic duty.
It's time to move on. Joe, one of the obligations is to be civil. You're violating it.
Yes.
Move on.
That's a violation, Mr. Scarborough.
I'm being civil. If there's anything you want to get off your chest and talking about the Giants, you can before we get started.
No, he doesn't want to.
Book.
Richard, in the book you write this, in a more perfect world, a book such as this would not be necessary because every American would get a grounding in civics, in the country's political structures and traditions, along with what is owed to and expected of its citizens in elementary school, in high school, and in college. It would be reinforced by parents, family and friends, along with community, religious, corporate, labor, and political leaders. Journalists would likewise play a constructive role. Alas, that is not the world we live in. There is a good deal of talk about the budget deficit. It may be that our civics deficit is of even greater consequence.
So Richard, in my experience, I can't speak for everybody else with children, but in my experience, it's not so much of an issue for my kids in high school. I don't think they get enough in elementary school, but in college, it's non-existent unless you go out searching for it. Doesn't it seem that we should have in a core curriculum, kids that go to American universities should have to take some classes in civics to understand how this country, how this government works?
Absolutely. As you say, it's offered on almost every college campus, but it's required by a precious few. So I think, I actually think you should not be able to get that diploma and leave the campus without a grounding in civics. I think it would be, one, necessary as a preparation for the rest of your life as a citizen. It'd also actually be good for students to do something in common. So many of these universities, people go off and they study engineering or computer sciences and they never meet anybody who studies in the humanities. So I think it would be really healthy, again, to break down some of the barriers. But yes, I think this is part of the preparation. And we're doing ourselves collectively no favor. Joe, you know this. This is a country that's based on an idea. You know, this is not a country founded on race or hereditary monarchies and all that. We're based on an idea. It's in the Declaration of Independence. It's in the Constitution. Why should we automatically assume that these ideas are transmitted from generation to generation if we don't take the time to articulate them and teach them? It was Reagan who said we need not just patriotism, but an informed patriotism. And I essentially think we're not doing it.
Michael Beschloss, I know you have the next question, but would you agree that this is something that every college student needs to learn, and not just one civics course, but at least a couple, so as they go out into the world, as they go out into the workforce, as citizens, they understand how this country works?
Totally true. I assume Mika and you were not expecting me to say that they shouldn't learn history and it's sort of a disposable item. Of course they should, and the founders assumed that they would. When Lincoln said, for instance, since we're quoting dead presidents, 1861 in his inaugural address talked about the mystic chords of memory that stretch back to every patriot's grave. Well, this was 1861. Not too many Americans alive remember the Revolutionary War, but he just assumed that people, because of either talking to their friends and relatives or studying, would know what the history of this country was and what it stood for. When I was growing up in Illinois, we assumed that if this country was going to go down, it was going to go down probably because Soviet missiles struck Chicago, in my case, never that there would be Americans who would turn on their own democracy. So my point is, for instance, the people on January 6th who attacked the Capitol, terrible the ones who hated democracy, but I'll bet you there was a larger number, just as Richard is saying in this fine book, which I've got right here, a larger number of them did not hate democracy, but were indifferent to democracy or don't even know what it is. That's why you have people saying that JFK Jr. is going to run with Donald Trump next year, or Jewish space lasers, which were mentioned earlier in the program. You can't have a democracy that is made up of people who don't even know what democracy is. Last point. Truman used to say, not every reader will be a leader, but every leader must be a reader. We've got to choose leaders who know all about history and what democracy means. Would you say that's true of every member of the House today?
Yeah, I think Michael raises obviously a lot of good points there. And as we've seen, as you've all heard, we've had big debates in this country about what is our history, the 1619 project versus the 1776 project. But I don't think it's impossible to school Americans in the facts of American history and then expose them to different interpretations. We don't only have one historical thread to teach, we have many, but we can expose them to the basic facts, what happened and when in this country's past, and then we can talk about different interpretations. We can expose them to the Constitution, to the Declaration of Independence. They can read the Federalist Papers. They can read some of those inaugural addresses, some of the farewell addresses. They can understand what checks and balances the whole idea is it's going to be very hard to get people to go out and participate in a political system if they don't understand its value and why participation matters. To